Containment Episode 10, A Time to Be Born. Now, I gotta say, this episode really surprised me. They did a couple of things that I wasn't expecting. They did do something that I was expecting towards the end. It wasn't exactly what I was expecting, but, and I'll get to more detail, but suffice it to say, I thought the episode ended too nicely until it got to that final scene, and I was kind of expecting, so I was like, freaking out, seems too good here. But just starting from the beginning, I really liked what they did. We got, Teresa is having her baby in this episode, and it plays with a lot of ideas in this one, where she's having this baby, and we have to see what's going on with Jana, we have to see what's going on with her friend, whose name I still can't ever seem to remember. And it's super easy. It's a name that I know, and it's from something else, where it's like, I hear it all the time. I can never remember her friend's name. Don't know why. But, they have a lot of content just from Teresa having this baby. Like, Xander, he's trapped, so he has to deal with not being able to be there for the mother of his child, or his child, itself. And then, of course, Teresa is having to deal with the fact that she doesn't have anyone there with her. Like, she has friends, but she doesn't have the people that she needs there, like her mother or, the father of her child. So she's kind of there alone with people who don't know how to deliver a baby. So she's super freaked out, and that makes a ton of sense. And then we have, three characters who really have no idea what they're doing. So we have Jana, who's freaking out, like, I don't know what to tell this girl, like, her mother isn't here, I can't handle this, like, I grew up, and it kind of took her back to her childhood, where it's like, I grew up on my own, I didn't have my mother, and now she doesn't have her mother here to, like, really help her, and, it was kind of really messing with her. And then her friend was dealing with the fact that she may or may not have a kid in the future, and I believe the guy's name is Dennis, which of course I remember his name and I don't even like him. But he comes back and he's dead. So I was like, holy crap, look at that. Like, and as soon as they're like, hey, it's me, I'm like, they're going to show him he's going to be super sick and dying. It was worse than I thought. I thought he'd just be like sweating, but he was like full dead. He was like, yellow and red and stuff all over. I was like, oh, he's toast. So I wasn't surprised by that when he comes back and it's like, I just, I want to be with you and my child. And of course she lies to him and it's like, I took a test and so you're off the hook. And that was a simple way to, get him out of there. Like, well, I guess this is goodbye. And I was totally fine with him dying. Him and the other guy was like, just hated them both the whole time. So I just didn't care. But, it then affects her character. And then, it helps her kind of help Teresa. Like, in the end, it's like she's the one who kind of helps her through the tough stuff and kind of tells her the tough things. Like, hey, unfortunately, your mother's not here. I believe this was her. It may have been Jana, but I'm pretty sure it was her friend. And it's like, your mother's not here. Xander won't be here either, but you got us, and we're just going to have to freaking make this work. Fortunately for them, Jake ends up showing up, and he helps deliver the baby by the end, and everything, works out. But Jake also has a crazy little story through this, where we go through all this stuff, and we find out, and this is one of the things that really surprised me. I had, like, this whole theory that it wasn't going to be Lamers, it would be her husband, because that's kind of the typical thing where two people are married, they of course have the same name, they live in the same place, you assume it's this person because they're in the show. It's like, oh, it's this person, they've been tricking us this whole time. And then it turns out to be the person that we met like once that they were married to, or something, or like a sibling who has like the same last name or something like that. But it ended up being Lamers, who was the the actual villain. And I was surprised by that. I really thought it was going to be her husband, and it would be that little trick where they would think it was Lamers, and she'd be like, I didn't do any of this stuff, and they would turn out to actually be her husband, because he was involved in this. And that's just what I thought. Like, the whole time I was so sure it was going to end up being her husband, like, oh, it's kind of that sort of twist, but it ended up actually being her. I was like, nope, they actually found out it was her, and it was really her. And Jake has to go through, after he finds out the information from Lex about it being Lamers, he has to go through all the stuff. It's like, alright, he gets the information from Lex about the symbol that has information, like some papers that'll, have some information, and he ends up going to the apartment of Leo's friends who died, and he finds out all this information has been completely wiped away. It's been, burnt to ash inside the tub. They were completely wrapped up, and of course he goes to Mies, like, it's gonna be Mies, because they kind of put the dots together. Like, Mies had a sat phone, and of course it had to be him, and Lex mentioned, like, it was him and the chief, because the chief was always talking about the sat phone and this and that. So they put it together, and Jake ends up going to Mies, and we kind of get both sides of the story from both Jake and Lex when they go to the two people that they can. And so he goes to Mies, and he, of course, gets like zero information. So unfortunately, that doesn't work out much for him. But he is able to actually get food from the gang leader guy who's like, I have kids too. Which somehow I managed to like this guy who totally robs these people blind. I like him more than I like Dennis. That says a lot. But Jake is able to get the food and stuff to Teresa, and on Lex's side of things, we find out that Mies, as well as the chief, were actually both tricked. And I love that. That was kind of the scene when I was like, oh, it truly is Lammers. Because I thought he'd kind of confront him, and he'd be like, oh, it wasn't Lammers that told me to do this. And he'd be like, oh, it was actually your husband. And that's what I thought was going to happen in that scene. Excuse me, where Lex would find out that it was actually Lammers' husband. But, excuse me, the chief gives him like the full information. Like, she told me that it was actually to wipe away any sort of false evidence that would, well, not even false evidence. It would just wipe away evidence of this guy being patient zero, so that it would get rid of the idea of, these specific people being stereotyped as they normally are and being branded as terrorists and stuff. And I was like, okay, so that kind of shows that the chief is actually a good guy. He's not, being a villain working with Lammers. He's actually a good guy. And so is Mies, who's still a bit of a dick. He seems like he technically hasn't done anything super bad. He did team up with the criminals. He did not have to do that, but he still chose to. So he's still a bit of a dick. But the chief is like, I sent him in there because it will wipe away information that would kind of affect like an entire race of people unjustly. And I was like, oh, he's not actually a bad guy. He's been tricked too, and Lammers has been at the top kind of manipulating everything. And that really surprised me. And I was glad that it surprised me, because like I said, I was so sure it would end up being your husband, which still would have been fine. I still would have been very interested in how that played out, with Lammers finding out it was her husband who was the villain. But it was just interesting. I like the way they did that. And he's like, the chief realizes that he'd been tricked, and Lex is like, look, we have to play this the right way. And so he finally gets to, get in touch with Leo after he'd been quarantined. And so, they have to figure out how they're going to play things, because, of course, once they get released, Lammers is like, okay, I'm going to take over, and what I'm going to do is make myself look great in front of the people. Whereas, like, you know what, she tells this one reporter, it's like, you know what, you come with me. And so this woman and her cameraman, they both go up to the thing, and she just lifts it, and she shows all the people, like, this is what we're dealing with. I screwed up before, but I'm going to make sure I don't screw up anymore. And she kind of does what Lex said she should have done from the very beginning. And now that everything's kind of, and of course, if he hadn't figured it out, it would have just been her looking good. But now that he knows the truth, it's like he has to go up against her. And she said, like, oh, I'm going to resign and stuff. So when I was watching it, that's when it kind of started, like, oh, things are seemingly too easy right now. But of course, once the episode ends, even the promo is like, oh no, she's not gonna take this lying down. She does not instantly resign like she said she would. So I'm looking forward to that confrontation. He's really gonna have to fight an uphill battle against this woman who is not only in charge, but knows more than he does, and now has like a great image because of the really big stance that she finally took in these in these crucial moments. So he's gonna have a lot to deal with, as well as the chief. And as high ranking as they both are, with Lex having been the face of it and the chief seriously being the chief of police, they still have a lot to go up against, because they have to go up against Lammers, who also now has control of the guy in the army, because he screwed up and he realized that, like, you told me not to send those people in there. And she kind of took charge of that situation as well. Like, look, we screwed up, but what we have to do now is make it work, and you have to trust me. So now he seemingly, I would assume, is just going to be on her side, and he would be, because they can't just give out that information like, oh, she's actually the bad guy, and because that would give, once it gets out to so many people, that would give them enough time to kind of rework it and spin it and say, like, that's not true. So, and that seems like what she's going to do anyway, where she does like the fake resigning, and then Lex is going to kind of be up against the wall, and he's going to have to figure out what the heck he's going to do now. So really looking forward to that. But we go through all this stuff, and he's like, I want you to resign. And she's like, fine, I'll do it. And I believe this happened after Teresa had her baby. So I was like, all right, that happened. Everything was fine. Because I thought for sure they'd have a sad moment, and Xander would, like, cough. And it's like, oh, that's depressing. But that doesn't end up happening. And then Lex has his moment where he goes and it's like, you're going to resign. All that works out. And so as we go through this whole episode, the one person that's kind of been trapped in one location was Katie. And seemingly everything was working out. We found out in this episode from Candace, who's actually come out of his personal quarantine, we find out that the strain Thomas gives off is still a deadly strain. It's just a lessened strain. So having no effects after the 48 hours doesn't actually apply anymore because his strain is just a lessened strain. It just takes longer to show its initial effects, which in a sense does mean that it's a higher chance that you could get a cure because you won't die automatically after 48 hours. You show symptoms about, I want to say, you show symptoms within the, after like the 48 hours, or like almost at the end of the 48 hours is when you finally start to show symptoms or something close to that. So Katie goes through this whole episode and she actually talks to Canards, and he of course avoids her, and she kind of confronts him about it officially, and he's like, oh, and he kind of just takes off in this episode. I thought they'd have, I didn't think he'd avoid it, to be totally honest. It's like, oh, I got busted. I thought he'd kind of talk to her, but he was just kind of like, oh yeah, this thing and this thing, and he took off, and she's like, you're a coward, and he was gone. He was out of there. And we go through this whole episode. Everything works out surprisingly well. Jake gets the food, he randomly ends up getting the food from the gang leader. He goes and he actually finds Teresa as he's about to give her the food, and it's like, oh crap, I have to help her deliver this baby. Everything works out fine. She has the baby. Xander gets to see the baby. He doesn't cough. Lex goes to Lumbers. She says she's going to resign. Everything seems too perfect. And then we get to the ending scene, and they're having a nice little moment. It's like, I delivered a baby today, and it was really good, and stuff like that. And then laughing up, and Jake, I think he says, like, how about when you get out, because I think she only had, like, almost like an hour, like less than an hour left. And it's like, hey, after this, why don't we go out? And then she coughs right on the window. It's like, yep, I knew, like, it just seemed way too perfect. And I thought, and I mentioned that before when she, had her hands all over the young girl when she was bleeding. I mentioned that it wouldn't surprise me if she got sick because they haven't had that moment with any of the main characters where someone could actually end up dying. And I said, like, it wouldn't surprise me. Like, I don't know if she'll actually end up dying, but it was like, it makes sense that she would at least get sick. And so we do end up actually seeing that at the end of this episode. And that really sucked, of course, because it is kind of left open. Like, they may find a cure from Thomas somehow. Because they talk about the fact that it would take like months and stuff, and they need all these crazy materials that they don't have in order to create even a vaccine, if not a cure. So I don't know what to really expect, because it's kind of TV. There's always some random thing like, poof, ex machina, and then, we got a cure in like a day or something crazy like that. So that could still happen. I don't know if it'll happen, and it's just kind of up in the air now, and we do have 2 episodes left, so depending on how they do the time, like how much time really passes, we may see Katie die, we may actually see her live, but it's really hard to tell, and I don't know, and that's the hard thing to kind of figure out, like, if they're going to kill her or not, because with her being, at least at this point, because they could get someone else sick in the next episode, but at least at this point, with her being the only sick character, it would make a lot of sense if she died because of the fact that she's a main character. Her dying would have a fairly big impact, not only because she's a main character, but she's also the main character with a child. Or she was the only person, at least, until Teresa actually had her baby. So they were like the only 2 that had like children and stuff like that. And, it would have like that really huge impact if this young mother died and her son was, he still has family and stuff, so he wouldn't be like an orphan, but he's old enough to recognize, like, my mom got sick and died, so it would have a huge impact on the show if they killed her off, not only as a main character, but as a character with the child. And then on the other end, it could just be the full suspense of it, and then she ends up getting saved at the end, and it's a nice, happier ending, because of course there have been people that died. So it could be a bit of a happier ending, and this is just the suspenseful moment, or this is like this suspense, and then it leads to her actually dying. So it's impossible to tell. It's going to be one or the other. She's going to live or she's going to die. And it's just all the evidence that they've said where it would take a long time, and just how all that plays out. But who knows? Anything could happen. She could randomly be immune. They could try all sorts of crazy stuff. Who knows? But I don't know. It's hard to tell if she's gonna live or die, but in general, of course, I would love to know what you guys thought about this episode. So please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts, your least favorite parts. Of course, my big question has to be: do you think Katie will live, or do you think that she will die? We have 2 more episodes to go, so odds are they'd hold that off until the very end. She might get sicker and sicker, and then boom, episode 12, we find a cure or something like that. But who the heck knows? It's, like I said, it's one of those things where it's like they could do it at the end to have that ending shock value where most of these people finally make it out, but she doesn't, and her son, in a sense, he makes it out alive, but he lost a part of himself. So they could do it that way as a shocking ending, or it could ultimately work out. And either way, I'd be fine with it because it would be good. Of course, in general, you just want people to live when they don't suck, at least. So I'd prefer it if she lived, and it's really hard. If I had to guess, I would say that she lives. I would say that they're going to pull like an Ex Machina sort of thing, and somehow it'll work out because all the evidence is saying like, oh, she's 100% dead. But I don't know, I just feel like this will be that thing. It's a TV thing, so sometimes it's hard to tell. Like, really, the more cliche thing, I guess, is that she would live, but I don't know. I don't know. It's really hard to tell. She might not live. I don't know. Like I said, it's hard. If I had to pick, though, I'd say I think she's gonna live, just from a generic sort of TV standpoint where people end up living as main characters. But this also isn't the type of thing where it's like, oh, this is gonna go on for multiple seasons. This is a mini series, and that's it. So who knows? We'll see where it goes. But like I said, I want to know if you guys think Katie will live or die, and of course, what you guys thought about this episode in general. So please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.